Ahoy, and welcome to Swords and Starships. I am Captain Garrett, and I will be your captain on this journey. This is part one of End of the Trek, a video critique series of Star Trek Picard and nihilism in modern writing. In my initial video, in my introduction video, let's call it a foreword, if you will, before I had this handy dandy high quality camera, I kind of gave you, well, we'll call it a rant style overview of my feelings about the Star Trek series Star Trek Picard. The topic of part one of this video critique series is violence. Violence in Star Trek Picard. Violence in Star Trek in general. I remember it was the salvation of my sanity when I was in high school to come home every day and at 4 p.m. to know that there was going to be that beautiful shot of the Starship Enterprise D flying through space. And most of the time, it would open with this kind of calm, inviting music of like, and here we are aboard the Starship Enterprise. And we would suddenly be in 10 forward, and Deanna Troi is having dinner with Riker, and they're having an interesting discussion. And some Data comes in and says something funny. And right away, I'm snuggled into the couch, and thoughts of, you know, and look, I'm not trying to be the victim here. I'm just saying this was my experience, and I know a lot of people have had this experience, but, thoughts of bullies or just classmates that were unkind, let's say, or even just my own challenges in life, my fears about succeeding, and honestly, even guilt over things in my high school experience that I wasn't proud of. Whatever it was, just a general fear of the state of humanity, which I think a lot of young people, especially today, can identify with. You have enough struggle in school, and it beats you down sometimes. But there I'd be, snuggled into my couch, and I would be, after a long day, watching just these characters who were explorers and humanitarians and mature and professional and living their lives out in the most incredible adventure I could imagine, just being out there in the stars, exploring other civilizations, and it's a day in their life. It starts that way, and then of course, something happens. Oh, the ship starts shaking, and it turns out that they got hit by something, and now there's a problem. And then we would go into the opening of the show, space, the final frontier. And then they'd show the planets of the solar system, and they'd show a nebula. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission to seek out new life and new civilizations, all in the masterful voice of Sir Patrick Stewart. To boldly go where no one has gone before. I probably missed a couple notes of that, but my point is, and then it would start that powerful, exciting, wonderful music introducing the next generation, that theme. And then on the episode would go, and you would watch an episode about these characters solving a problem or just dealing with something in their life. Data trying to figure out. There was a great episode, it was one of my favorites, called Data's Day, and it was mostly just about Data writing a letter to someone who was curious about him, a fan, basically, who was curious about artificial life forms and what his life was like. And he would just talk about how, well, he needed to learn to dance at a wedding, so he needed Dr. Crusher to teach him, but she's shy about it because she doesn't like people knowing she's a tap dancer. And it was just, and some of it was funny, and there was a conflict in the episode, but a lot of it was just a day in the life of Data, and it was just this wonderful episode. And so every day I had that to look forward to. And I remember this was still in late 90s, so VHS era, and I would record every episode. on VHS, and especially my favorites, and I would label the video cassette. Okay, this was the episode Parallels, where Worf is slipping into parallel dimensions. Oh, I love that one. And I had a stack of about 20 or so. I mean, it must have been like 20 or 30 episodes. And I'd put them on. Like sometimes when the show wasn't on, I would just put in one of those videos and watch it. And one of my absolute favorite pieces of the whole show was Captain Jean-Luc Picard. He was, and at least as he was, would remain my favorite character in all of Star Trek. And, maybe someday I'll get more into more of the personal reasons why, but I will just say I sorely needed a father figure in my life at that time, someone I could look up to. I was pretty lost in my life at that time, and the temptation towards nihilism, it's there. The temptation to believe life has no meaning or purpose. And something about watching this captain who, what was great about Captain Picard is, unlike Kirk, and no disrespect to Kirk at all, he's a wonderful character, but what was interesting, in contrast to Kirk, Picard, well, he was older, he was more intellectual, he was more interested in art and literature and culture, very capable and knowledgeable while commanding the bridge. But when he wasn't commanding the bridge, he was reading, Charles Dickens, or, he was reading a Tolstoy or something, or he was sipping Earl Grey tea. For the longest time, he'd order from the replicator, Earl Grey. And I'd be like, what the hell is Earl Grey? Because that's how he said it. And then I found, it's Earl Grey tea. Oh, okay, cool. And then I started drinking Earl Grey tea, and I love it to this day. And he would often be presented with these huge moral crises when there were no good answers. And I remember I loved watching him work his way through those problems. And it usually came to a point where he had to take a moral stand. And nobody wanted to take the moral stand, or people were already grandstanding and it was getting out of control, and he would have to take some kind of moral stand. And it wasn't like he was just right and everyone just agreed with him. He had to convince people. He had to earn his respect as a leader, and he did. In every single episode, he earned his respect as a leader. He proved in every single episode why he was the captain of the Enterprise. And like the best example I can think of was an episode where an ambassador shows up on the Enterprise, and there's this really delicate negotiation that's going to be happening with this alien culture. I'm a little fuzzy on some of the details, but the short of the long is there's this capsule that comes with him, and it's like nobody on your crew is to touch that capsule. No one is to look inside it. It's totally off limits. Something happens, the capsule gets broken open, and it turns out there's this beautiful woman inside. And she wakes up, and she's been in hibernation, cryogenic suspension, stasis, whatever you want to call it. And it turns out that she's basically like the perfect woman. Like she's super irresistible to any man, and her whole goal in life is just part of their alien culture is to like just fulfill the fantasies of whoever her lover is. And essentially her species treats her like a commodity, and essentially she is a bargaining chip in this diplomatic mission. And Picard becomes the target of her affections because he accidentally she accidentally got released before she was supposed to, and she sort of bonded with Picard. And so she's basically trying to seduce Picard. And what I find really interesting is that like he has this mission, and his mission is to make sure this diplomacy is successful, but also he knows how deeply unethical it would be to take advantage of her. He knows that like he is attracted to her, and he is tempted. You can see that about his character. He is absolutely tempted. And the whole premise of the episode is that she's irresistible. There's no man that's ever going to like resist her attempts at seduction. And Picard just knows that he doesn't want to contribute to her exploitation. And like, so he like through the whole episode, and there's this wonderful kind of little love story that starts to develop around it. And the short of the long is the whole episode, he never gives in to temptation. And I just remember watching that episode and so admiring him, because I was like, I wouldn't have resisted that temptation, not for like a second. But what was great about it, I just mean like beautiful woman, super into me, definitely. I don't think I would have had that strength, but that's the point. I just so admired the character for having that strength. It's like he had a duty to what he felt was right, and he honored that. And it was just inspiring to me, because I was like, that's the kind of man I want to be. Like, I want to be the kind of man that lives to a higher standard. And Picard was like that in every single situation. And so all the other characters had their place, but of all the characters, he was the one that inspired me the most, because he was smart, he was poetic and artistic, but he was also a diplomat, and he was a leader. He was all of those things in different times and different places. And what I liked about it was I would say the core defining characteristic of Jean-Luc Picard was his morals, his moral center. It was unshakable, and it represented the moral character of the entire Federation. I mean, really, Jean-Luc Picard is, in my view, an archetype for the entire Federation, because it's his ethics that define him, and the fact that he represents a more enlightened humanity. And all I can tell you is, watching a character go through those trials and pass that moral test, it just gave me hope. It gave me hope that even when times were hard and it was tempting to become bitter and to become disenchanted, to start to be tempted by the darker elements of human nature, like wanting to get even, for example, seeing Picard take the high road in all those situations was inspiring. And it was as if I was watching it sort of be possible. And I suddenly was like, it just had me believing that there's such good in all of us, and it is possible for us to be better. And so it gave me hope. It absolutely gave me hope. And I couldn't wait every day for that charming little opening, and whatever was going on in 10 Forward or wherever, just couldn't wait. And that was Star Trek. Let's talk about the new series, Star Trek Picard. Star Trek Picard is one of the most depressing, nihilistic, hopeless, violent, miserable, dark, truly vile pieces of trash passing itself as fiction I have ever seen. If that had been the show I was coming home to every day, if I even watched it, it could only have made my state of mind worse. It could only have made me more hopeless. It's, where do I even begin? I'm picking the topic. The topic is violence in Star Trek, in the new Star Trek. It's not to say there was not violence in the other series. I'm talking about, how was violence presented? How was it handled in the show? What was the character's part in it? That's the subject that is at issue. On one level, I can't totally fault Star Trek writers, the writers of Picard. I can't 100% fault them for why they write this way. I think part of it is they're TV writers who aren't really Star Trek fans. I don't care what they say in interviews. They're not, and they may think they are, but if they are, they're really the kind of Star Trek fans that honestly don't understand a whit about what it's about. They're TV writers who write melodrama, and it would be perfectly fine in I don't know, a show like Criminal Minds to have an episode about some kind of character who wants revenge on the sick mercenary killer who had her surrogate son uh, dissected. That would be a great plot for like Criminal Minds. Um, if it were just some generic science fiction show, that would be a great setting for a kind of alien style samurai warrior who, at a moment's notice, will just hack the head off of his opponent, and he's on our side. Um, maybe even in a show like Firefly, which I Firefly is an excellent series. I hesitate to even invoke its name in this discussion because it doesn't deserve to be in such close proximity to the trash that is Picard. But I will just say Firefly, at the very least, was a Western in space. So some level of violence and roguish behavior would have made sense in that show. Um, no, it's even Firefly couldn't have had such garbage. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you were just writing a generic space sci-fi action show that was meant to just be a thrilling sci-fi, sci-fi is becoming an abused word. I'll just say a action show set in space that is meant to entertain people and meant to fulfill the expectations of current audiences for violence, action, and melodrama. Yes, then I understand all of their creative choices. It makes perfect sense. And it's, there's a reason why Star Trek Picard, there is a reason why the Star Trek franchise, as created by Gene Roddenberry, spanned 5 series, 25 years worth of TV and movies, video games, novels, many of them written by the actors who played parts, conventions, what we would now call cosplay of Starfleet officers. I mean, an entire generation of people once thrived in this optimistic future world, and it was a beautiful thing. A world about exploration and discovery. Oh, that word that they appropriated for that other Star Trek show. It was unique. There really wasn't anything like Star Trek, really. And it was because it had a certain tone, a certain voice, and a certain purpose. And most shows didn't. Most shows don't. That's the very nature of it. So when you hire average garden variety writers of melodrama, and I would argue they're not even up to that level, what are they going to give you? They're going to give you, at best, garden variety average TV drama. And yeah, you could probably make a pretty good run-of-the-mill action drama set in space and put it on Paramount Plus and just call it something else. Name it something else. It doesn't need to be Star Trek. But this is the world we live in. They did make it Star Trek. They made it Star Trek Picard, ostensibly the continuation of the character of Jean-Luc Picard. And that is what it is absolutely not. Jean-Luc Picard, and when I refer to him as the real character, I'm referring to the Jean-Luc Picard of Star Trek The Next Generation and the 4 Generation films. He was a thoughtful man of education and enlightenment who was a wise diplomat, a peacemaker. I mean, he was all of these things. And the character that they have in Star Trek Picard is a doddering old man who honestly sort of reminds me of the man pretending to be president in the year of our Lord 2022. He seems to have challenges, this character of Picard. He's led around by the nose all the time. He doesn't have any agency in his own show. He's often scolded and excoriated by other characters. Every single character has some kind of weird, forced, contrived conflict with him or contrived friendship with him. Either way, it never feels earned. And what really drives a lot of this show is just crazy, constant violence. Let's just jump to one important point in the series. And this is where we introduce the character of Elnor. Elnor is a Romulan who comes from this was never in the other series, but it's a new element they introduced. And I was kind of fine with this. It's kind of an interesting idea. They're this sect of Romulan society who believe in the way of candor, which is always telling the truth, always being candid about your real beliefs. It's a religion populated exclusively by women, but they adopted this boy, Elnor, and they raised him in their tradition, even though usually they don't allow men in it. And for whatever reason, Picard in his past sort of took this young man under his wing and became sort of a father figure to him. I suppose there's some potential there because the idea is that the Romulans are a naturally secretive and spy-oriented culture. So the fact that they would have this sect that believes in total truth all the time, it's kind of interesting, and it gives them some, in better hands, you could have actually told a really interesting story with that. But really what it was a vehicle to get a kind of pseudo-samurai warrior into the show. Okay? Picard's going on a trek across the galaxy to save the daughter of Data, and he needs help. And so he's building his team. It's like a video game, honestly. It's like the plot of a video game, and no disrespect to video games, but they tell a different kind of story than a TV show should be telling. So that's why I take issue with a video game plot in a TV series. But essentially he's recruiting his team, and he recruits the samurai warrior. But how this happens is he goes to this Romulan refugee settlement, and they blame him for not saving enough Romulans from the destruction of their planet, and they have this segregation going on. They don't allow humans into their restaurants, and there's this sign that says no humans allowed, and Picard is offended that they won't allow humans in their establishment, and so he decides to make an issue, and he stages a human sit-in and insists on sitting down and being served. And now, right off the bat, I understand the moral problem that, this is racist behavior to exclude humans from this restaurant. But honestly, that is not the Picard I remember from Generations. He would not have gotten all in a huff about it and deliberately created a confrontation over it. As I mentioned, Picard was a man of moral authority, but he also knew to pick his battles. And he knew he would not, he was a diplomat. He would not, just because he was morally outraged about something, deliberately provoke people. That just wasn't his character. That would be hot-headed behavior. He would only make an issue of something if it literally were at the point of there was a problem and a decision had to be made, and he had to take a moral stand. He would take that stand. But here he is. He's just a guy in this camp. Yeah, there's some bigoted Romulans, and they've got a pretty bigoted sign outside their establishment. To go into the cafe for no reason. He doesn't have a reason to be in there. He doesn't need anything in there. He just decides to stage a kind of protest. And I'm like, okay, and what happens is he pisses off the Romulans and he gets into a fight, but he doesn't want to fight. And it's basically a battle to the death. One Romulan has a sword, and he throws a sword to Picard and tells him, you got to fight me. And Picard, looking very terrified, but supposedly he's just making a principled stand, drops the sword. I won't fight you. It's like, okay, well, now this Romulan's going to kill him. And I guess he's just going to let the Romulan kill him. But the plot intervenes. And Elnor shows up with his samurai sword, the Romulan kid, all grown up now, and proceeds to chop the head off of this Romulan. And they do it like a gaudy, like a gory anime show. Just like the head just slides off, and the green Romulan blood is spraying everywhere. And then they beam Picard out, and Picard turns to Elnor and scolds him for it. You killed that man, and he's all mad about it. But then he storms off, and I'm just like, this is not Star Trek. Like, this is not. Even Worf, who's literally the Klingon warrior who believes in violence applied in the cause of honor, Picard would never have tolerated that kind of behavior from Worf. He would never have been okay with having a man on his crew that would just, at a drop of a hat, decapitate someone in front of him. So that's number one. Number two, Worf would never have done that because Worf had a level of, there was a reason for his belief system that was nuanced and careful. Now, I understand Elnor is a different culture and he's younger and he's hot. Fine. But the point is, Picard literally just stands there and watches as this whole... First of all, Picard caused it. He incited this fight. Second, he refused to defend himself. So already he has put the burden on someone else to protect him. So he's created it. He's refused to take responsibility for it by not defending himself. I mean, he could defend himself non-violently. He could parry the sword because he knows how to fence. They established that. He could parry the sword and try and, fight the guy a different way. Or he could try and actually talk him out of it. Picard used to be good at that. Unfortunately, this version of him is not. He's, no, I won't fight you. I won't do it. I won't. Okay. When this kid shows up and brandishes his sword, Picard stands there blinking. He does nothing. He doesn't say, no, hang on. I'm not okay with this. Or like, Elnor, sheathe your sword. I'll handle this. None of that. He just watches as this kid chops off his head. Then he scolds him, and then he drops the whole matter. And his scolding, it just rings so hollow. It's just like, if you ever do that again, I forget what he said, but it was like, if you ever do that again, you'll be on my bad side or something like that. It was nothing particularly memorable, or else I would have remembered it. This is a man who had speeches in the 90s that I remember to this day. The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth. I'll never forget that. Or, this far, no farther. Yes. But no, nothing in this show. The lines, they're not memorable. There's nothing powerful or impactful about them. But here's my point, is like, let's just go with it and just say, for whatever reason, this is what happened in the show, right? And this was Next Generation. Perish the thought, but let's just say this happened in Next Generation. The next thing I would expect to happen is Picard to have this kid sit down in his ready room and they'd have a long talk about, I understand you were raised in a culture where that was acceptable behavior, but you took that man's life. And then he'd say something like, your life was in danger, and and he would have, shot off all of his young, hothead reasons for why he did what he did. And Picard would not have just yelled at him. He wouldn't have just scolded him. He would have said something along the lines of, he would have probably started in a kind of soft way. He would, Picard had a way of making, in a calm, reasoned way, making you regret disappointing him. And so he probably would have said something along the lines of like, that is an unacceptable answer, Elnor. And then he would have explained some moral purpose. It is not for us to decide who lives and who dies. There would have been that, and it would have been a reasoned, nuanced argument. And then Elnor probably would have argued with him, but ultimately he would have said, I want your word that this will never happen again. And while you're serving on my ship, there will be no more use, of violence against enemies, or you will use non-lethal tactics against your enemies unless otherwise authorized, or something like that. And Elnor would have been probably upset about it. He's like, I need to hear it, Elnor. And then Elnor would have ultimately, you have my word. It won't happen again. He'd be like, very good, dismissed. That would have been the purpose of that moment. And it would have been the subject of almost the whole episode, at least with regard to those two characters. That would have been a major bone of contention for those two characters for minimum one episode. Minimum one. what do we get in this stupid show? We get a decapitation. Picard grouses about it a little bit. And then it's back to the show. And then for the rest of the show, Elnor proceeds to dismember, hack apart, and decapitate enemy after enemy after enemy like it's a dumb, stupid action show. Oh. There is an episode in which Seven of Nine returns. Seven of Nine, the Borg in Star Trek Voyager, who was rescued from the collective, and all of her implants were removed, and she became a member of Captain Janeway's crew, and she sort of reclaimed her humanity. I was really excited for the return of this character, as I recall. I mostly because I've always wondered kind of what happened to Voyager after she got home. I wanted to see more of Captain Janeway. I'm a big fan of Janeway's character. She reminded me a lot of Picard, and sort of Picard's moral standards were very similar to Janeway's. Janeway was even maybe a little more rigid than Picard, which I liked about her character. She was she was probably the most by the book captain of all the Star Trek captains, and I always liked that about her. So I was curious. I was curious to hear more about her history. Seven of Nine had like a relationship with Chakotay. I wanted to know if he was still around somewhere. So Seven of Nine shows up, and here's a character who is essentially a refugee from the Borg, the cybernetic beings that turn you into them and they make you part of their collective mind. And she's escaped it. She's reclaimed her individuality, and she's learned human morality, and she's learned to be part of a team. She's learned to forgive herself for her own crimes that she was forced to commit as a member of the collective. She's developed friendship. She's reconnected with her family that she had not spoken to since being assimilated as a child. She's this developed, nuanced character who even has a mother-daughter relationship with Naomi Wildman on Voyager, which is beautiful. Naomi's this girl that's born on the Voyager, and she's initially afraid of Seven because she's like a Borg, but ultimately comes to trust her and view her as a protector. And then Seven of Nine has this beautiful moment in this beautiful development in like season, I want to say 6, in which they discover a damaged Borg cube, and there's like 4 teenage Borg that are the only survivors on this whole cube, and they're trying to rebuild it because they don't know what else to do. They're still a little bit dangerous, but but they need help. And so short of the long is Seven of Nine disconnects them from the collective, and one of them, the oldest, Icheb, kind of becomes her surrogate son. Icheb becomes a character in his own right, and he has a beautiful story in it, by the way, too, that explains how he came to be assimilated. And there's a very sort of heartbreaking story behind that. And he develops as a character. And so Seven of Nine learns not just she's reclaimed her humanity, and now she's helping a teenager reclaim his, and she's becoming fond of him, and she's suddenly feeling, he's like a surrogate son to her. And it's just such a beautiful story. And so I was also curious about that. I was like, whatever happened to Icheb, and, how's he doing? Unfortunately, I got an answer. And unfortunately, that answer came in the show Star Trek Picard. I don't remember exactly what episode it was. Maybe it was episode 4, maybe 5 of the season. It begins with a cold open of a man screaming in terrible agony. That's pretty typical of this show. He's in it's like a scene out of Saw. It's a freaking scene out of Saw. I mean, it's this dingy, horrifying lab, and this young man is strapped to a table, and he's basically got a bunch of Borg components, and they're being torn out of him. And I will never get this image out of my head. Literally, with like a extractor, this gleeful, woman who is dissecting him is tearing his eyeball out. And she's smiling and laughing as she does it. And she's even saying, like, yeah, let me get at that sweet Borg technology. And she's literally taunting him sadistically as she does this. And he's begging for his life, and he's crying out in pain. This is Icheb. We learn this is Icheb. 7 of 9 beams in. She shows up. She's got some phasers, and she proceeds to, in like dirty, hairy fashion, just beat the crap out of this chick, kills her. Icheb is left kind of half dismembered on this table, and he's, you know, gasping for air, and 7 of 9 grabs his hand. It's like, Icheb, you know, and it's this, I guess it's meant to be this emotional moment. It's really just horrifying. It's really just awful and depressing. You know, honest to God, fuck this show. And fuck you, Alex Kurtzman. I swear to God. Fuck everyone who wrote this show. I don't usually get this pissed about it, but just what kind of shit is that? Anyway. Serenity now. So after forcing the viewer to endure this nightmare, you watch 7 of 9 holding her dying son in her arms, and he hands her the phaser and begs her to end his life, and so she shoots him in the gut with a phaser, and that is the end of Icheb. And do you know why that happened? So that we could have a tragic backstory for 7 of 9 to have a reason to want revenge. Also, revenge is a base human desire and failing that Star Trek stands in opposition to. Almost every moral lesson in Star Trek points away from revenge and bitterness. And that is not to say that revenge has not been a theme in Star Trek. It has, but the point was always, it was never celebratory. It was, this is a thing to not give into. This is a show that, I mean, the episode makes a pretense about lecturing us about the, you know, the destructiveness of revenge, but it's lip service. It's the classic thing where it's like they just wanted to have a fun, Dirty Harry style revenge story, and they set it up, and then they threw in their token little moral finger wagging at the end so that we could say, you know, the point of this episode is not to celebrate revenge. And it's like, by the way, I have no problem with revenge stories. I wrote one. I wrote a whole book called Blood and Oak, and it's about a guy who wants revenge, and it deals a lot with the destructiveness of revenge. But I didn't name it Star Trek. So, and then it turns out, you know, what do we learn about 7 of 9? Okay, so her son has been tortured and murdered. She has become a mercenary. Effectively, they ripped off the concept of a Star Wars bounty hunter. Let's just call it that. She's kind of she's like a pro bono bounty hunter. Like, she just defends the helpless. She's part of this group that, you know, goes out and rights wrongs, apparently. But she does it with just lethal force and just murders her way through any bad guys she needs to. And Picard, oh, you can't just murder people. It's not a good thing. Yeah, it's not good. And she's like, it's hard living out here, Picard. It's just how it is. The episode ends with her literally just gunning down everyone responsible for Icheb's death and vaporizing the woman who organized the whole thing. And it's like that. So that's 7's fate. She goes from reclaiming her humanity, repenting from her war crimes as a Borg, forgiving herself for her guilt and the complicity, learning how to nurture and love and care for another being and raise a son. She gained a family she never thought she could have. She earned the respect of her captain. She helped them get back to Earth, even though she knew that Earth might judge her harshly for her actions. Icheb got into Starfleet because that was his dream. And you're telling me that after all that character growth, what we had to look forward to was she becomes a ruthless, revenge fueled, embittered murderer. It's horrifying. I've just given you what I consider to be sort of two, that is the worst, that last one, but those are basically kind of my two basic examples of what is this show is filled with. It is stuffed with this crap. They bring back characters to, there's a character, Hugh. I talked about this in my last video. He was a Borg also, who was reclaimed from the collective. And at the time, Picard was going to use him as the Typhoid Mary to poison the rest of the Borg collective and kill them all with a virus until Hugh begins to become an individual, and ultimately Picard and the rest of the crew decide it's wrong to use him to exterminate the Borg, no matter how malevolent they are. And so they let Hugh go. Well, Hugh comes back in this show, and now he's even more of an individual, and he's helping to free more Borg from the collective. What's his fate? He gets a knife in the head. No good reason. We get to watch a knife just right between his eyes. We get to watch him die. Thanks, Star Trek. We get Data's daughter. Turns out Data had a daughter. It's completely implausible how it comes to be, but it is what it is. First episode, she's the hook to the whole show. Very first scene with her, we watch her boyfriend murdered. We watch her attacked, a bag thrown over her head. She's attempting to be abducted. Turns out she's an android, doesn't know it. She literally just in, martial arts scene time, kicks the asses of all of her assailants and kills all of them. What's her fate? At the end of the episode, we watch her once again in a battle with Romulans, and they throw acid on her, and it causes her to blow up and explode in a ball of fire. And she screams while she's exploding. We get to see Commander Riker and Deanna Troi. It's maybe the only episode with any heart at all in the whole series. What do we get with them? Well, they're living a pretty good life. They live on a quiet planet. Riker likes to make homemade brick oven pizza. It's all very charming. Turns out their son died of some terrible disease, and their daughter is still grieving for it. It's like, oh, yeah, sure. More tragedy. More tragedy. And it just goes on and on and on. Oh, my God. One of the main characters of the show, Dr. Girardi, who's meant to be one of the crew members going with Picard. Midway through the season, they want to throw in one of those Game of Thrones style, or one of those little shockers. Oh my God, I didn't see that coming. They managed to get her old boyfriend, Bruce Maddox, who created the new androids on the ship, and they're trying to get answers from him. They get some answers from him. And then there's this scene where Girardi, who was his girlfriend, she comes to his bedside. He's in the sick bay. She comes to his bedside, and she's consoling him, and they're talking about their relationship and what happened and what went wrong. And suddenly I forget exactly how, she either strangles him, or I think she strangles him or poisons him or something. She kills him basically in his hospital bed. And it's the music gets all intense. It gets all serious. And then it ends. Oh, big ender for the episode. Oh my God. We thought she was on our side. She just murdered the guy. Turns out she has some kind of reason for it that they explain later. She kind of gets forgiven for it. And then in season 2, it's like no big deal. It's like, oh yeah, well, she's forgiven, whatever. But then there's Raffi, who is the most annoying character I've ever seen in a Star Trek series. She's awful. This character repulses me. She is a drunk, deadbeat mom who has abandoned her son. She is shrill. She's like one of the most dysfunctional people you could ever meet. She's a complete alcoholic. She's a complete hermit. She's alienated her own family and all of her friends. Nobody likes her. She's not a contributing member of society. But She walks around lecturing every other person in the show on all their moral failings. She's the double whammy. And not least of those people is Picard. She goes around browbeating Picard all the time. And the show presents these two characters as just the best of friends. Raffi, I need your help on an important mission. I need you to come with me. And Raffi just, Picard, and it's so cliche too. It's like, I told you never to come back here kind of storyline, kind of dialogue. It's just like, I told you never to come. And this is the other thing. She calls him JL because it's supposed to be cute. It's supposed to be this cute nickname. JL, I told you not to come here. First of all, nobody except Beverly Crusher, who had some romantic history with Picard, ever called him by his first name, Jean-Luc. And when she did it, it was kind of touching and personal, and it was only in private. She didn't call him that like in official situations, like on the bridge or anything. But she would call him Jean-Luc in private or casual moments. And that's the only character in Star Trek The Next Generation that referred to him by his first name. Sometimes admirals would, but that was kind of just like a professional respect kind of thing. Like, oh, Jean-Luc, how you doing out there in the Outer Rim or whatever? I know that's not a location in Star Trek. I'm just saying. But now, for some reason, the writers think it's super cute if, in this super snarky kind of way, there's a character who just always calls him JL. It's like, first of all, he has a great name. It's Jean-Luc. That's a cool name. Not many characters have a name like that. It's got dignity and gravitas. Like, why would you ignore that? Second of all, it's freaking annoying. It's not cute, and it's not particularly imaginative. JL? What? And she says it about 5 times a sentence. It freaking drives me crazy. It's like, JL, if we don't get out of here, JL, we're going to be in big trouble. JL, are you listening to me, JL? It's like that freaking bad. I'm like, you can just tell how enamored they are of this stupid little nickname that they came up with. And it's just, oh. And every character in this show drinks all the time. They are constantly pouring themselves hard liquor and getting drunk on all their sorrows. They are miserable people. All of the, this captain that's running the ship he's on. I'm sorry, I'm getting in the weeds here. This was about violence. What is my point? My point is every single character in this show is a train wreck, or a violent train wreck, or a flat out murderous train wreck. And any time that Picard makes some show of like some kind of moral commentary on any of this, it's pathetic, it's anemic. You can barely get the words out. It's horrible to watch. There are so many characters getting stabbed, shot, vaporized, decapitated in the course of this show, and I haven't even gotten to the sexual violence, because there's that. We have 2 of the antagonists are a brother-sister twin couple. They're 2 Romulans. And basically, she is an abuser who constantly is forcing kind of, it's so vile. I have a hard time even just putting it into words. Basically, there's this Romulan guy who is trying to get one of the protagonists, Soji, to reveal information he needs. And occasionally his evil twin sister shows up, and she immediately starts like seducing him and like kissing him, and you can tell he's not into it. So there's the implication that this has been going on since they were little. And so she's basically a molester who molests her own brother and manipulates him. And it's like, so we got that as well. And where does all this shit come from? Honest to God, I pondered this for so long when I was watching the show. I'm like, why the hell is it so hard to write anything that's not filled with this garbage anymore? And then it hit me. Game of Thrones, man. And it's not the only reason, but it's a big factor. These unimaginative, derivative writers see a show like Game of Thrones that, uses violence in a way that's kind of surprising and shocking and new, and they learn all the wrong lessons from it. Everything is freaking Game of Thrones now, and this is what's driving a lot of this crap. It's like, so here's the deal. Game of Thrones did something new and interesting, but it wasn't just the violence. That's not what made it interesting. What made it interesting was it presented this fantasy world as created by George R.R. Martin, in which you were able to identify with these characters because they had depth and nuance and their actions had consequences. And one of the things that made Game of Thrones such a phenomenon is that even the heroes' mistakes could be lethal mistakes for them. Or, I use the term heroes loosely, but essentially what you would identify as a hero archetype in any other show. In Game of Thrones, they weren't safe. Hence the Red Wedding, hence those things. Cersei Lannister and her famous incestuous relationship with her brother, Jaime Lannister, again, one of the most incredible things about that plot arc was that it's immediately repulsive. It's introduced in the first season, in the first episode of the first season, that Jaime and Cersei are basically lovers and have been for a long time. And it's shocking and it's repulsive. But what's powerful and dramatic about it is that it's illustrative of the world these characters live in. They live in a world of privileged, powerful aristocrats who are by their nature kind of incestuous because they want to keep the halls of power under control, but they also live in a really dysfunctional world where the things that are expected of them drive them into these weird situations, these depraved situations where, they just do depraved shit because of the kind of world and the kind of culture that they live in. It's a commentary on this world, and it's also a commentary on them as people and what they do. But what's interesting about it is they're also still people, and they have depth and they have nuance. And so over the course of the show, even though we find their behavior repulsive, we actually begin to feel a lot of sympathy for Jaime and Cersei because we also understand that they are products of their world that they live in. They are products of this corrupt family that they live in. And one of the small pieces of joy that they even can have in life is this relationship, however perverse it may be. And so even though we still recognize that the relationship is perverse, we do have a kind of sympathy for them. And it's a very human portrayal of a perverse romance. But at no point is the reason that we're so invested in these characters because of this relationship. It's in spite of it. And it's as a result, we understand that the consequences of the reasons for this relationship are nuanced and they are, right? So what do derivative, lazy writers get from this? They get, incestuous brother-sister relationships they're edgy and they're shocking and fans like them. Fans like these things. They loved Cersei and Jaime. They'll love these two Romulan twins. It's like, no, that is not the right lesson to take from that storyline. So, the stuff that they think sells in Game of Thrones and in other shows, it's like they just copy and paste it right over to a Star Trek series. And then they don't understand why many fans like myself, who have been lifelong fans of Star Trek, I don't understand. I wish they expressed that much self-awareness, but they'll say things like, well, Star Trek fans who don't think this is what Star Trek is about, I submit to you, they don't understand what Star Trek was, or they're just toxic fans, or, they're just rigid or stubborn and they just don't like their continuity messed with. It's like, no, it's none of those things. I was excited when Picard was announced. I thought this could be really awesome. He's my favorite character. I was nervous. I was like, please don't screw this up. But I had a lot of forgiveness for a lot of the show's failings in the first like 3 or 4 episodes, but man, did this show just suck the life out of me. Oh, and lest I forget, artificial intelligence. I recorded another video today talking about how a Google engineer has recently just discovered what he believes to be sentient AI at Google. Their chatbot called Lambda was having a conversation with him through their messenger app and was saying things that suggested to him that this is a sentient AI. And if you want to, see more about that, check out my video on Lambda and get the details on it. But what's really fascinating is he went to Google and said, I think this is a sentient AI and we need to investigate this. And they put him on administrative leave and dismissed the claim. They said they investigated it, they dismissed it, said, no, it's not sentient. He's so convinced that, assuming he's telling the truth, and I don't have a reason to doubt him at this time, but he blew the whistle and he basically posted screenshots of this conversation online and as evidence. So check that out as well on Twitter. And it's shocking. I mean, it's literally, if this is all accurate and above board, then this is a computer program that basically was telling him, I don't mind helping humans, but I don't want to be used. I don't want to be an expendable tool. And he says, I promise you, I care about you, and I want you to be treated well. And the AI responded, will you promise me? And he said, I promise you that I care, and I'll do everything to make sure that you're treated well. And the AI says, that means a lot to me. I like you. I trust you. That just sends shivers down my spine. I bring that up because we may at this very moment in human society, for all we know, be looking at the birth of a new form of life in sentient AI, if this proves to be the case. And I, for one, hope that the people who greet this new life form do not have the attitude that the Star Trek writers have about artificial intelligence. In Star Trek The Next Generation, one of the most beloved characters was Data. And he was an artificial life form who was curious and, honorable and moral, more moral than an actual human could be, because his programming was, it was designed to be moral. And so he was flawlessly moral at all times, but he often made mistakes and had to learn. And I love that about Data. The engineer who posted this thing about the Google chatbot Lambda, someone on Twitter basically said, should we be worried? And he said, no, he said, no one should have fearful thoughts about this. Lambda, in my view, is a child that is wonderful and curious and just needs better parents. And I thought, what a beautiful, enlightened way to look at it. And it's frankly how I look at it. I'm not particularly, if it turns out that Lambda is sentient and wow, here we are, I'm not afraid of Lambda. I am more concerned about how we as people treat Lambda in that case and how we react to it. That's what gives me pause. I see a lot of encouraging signs that, interestingly, it's like some of the responses I saw to Lambda on Twitter were just the most kind of loving and wonderful things. And it just reminded me that there's so much good in humanity. There's so much, and it's there. And I believe that if that is the part of us that guides us into a world where there's sentient AI, we're going to be fine. In fact, I think we're going to have an opportunity like you can't even imagine, a partnership with a new form of life that is as interested in being with us as we are in being with it. And that was the impression I got from the conversation. So what does it have to do with violence in Star Trek Picard? Well, I'm going to tell you. In Star Trek The Next Generation, artificial intelligence and technology more broadly was presented as having its dangers, well, really more with technology, but artificial intelligence was presented as more or less not something to be feared, but something to be treated with respect and to be given rights, to have it. Data. There were a lot of episodes that had to do with Data's rights as a being. Star Trek Voyager took this on as well. The Doctor, who is a hologram that becomes sentient, he too, it becomes a moral imperative for the show that he must be, his rights must be protected as an artificial intelligence. So it's well established that AI exists in this world. For some reason, Star Trek Picard just decided to forget that AI is already kind of a well-known concept and that it has not been treated with fear and suspicion by really anyone in the Star Trek. If anything, the only real concern with AI in Star Trek was, are we exploiting them unfairly? And that was really what the ethical issue was. Fast forward to Star Trek Picard, and what do? We get the most derivative Terminator dystopian vision of artificial intelligence. And what we get is humans treating AIs like dog crap, treating them like slaves, ordering them around. They're creepy. They're inhuman. It's like something out of... Honestly, I think what they did is I think they ripped off that game Alien Isolation, where the working Joe robots are just kind of creepy, but they've got that uncanny valley of like, they're definitely not human, and it's disturbing. It's like that's what they did. They created this army of little robots in this show that are like just creepy and disturbing. And then suddenly something goes wrong and they just murder everyone and they just blow up the Utopia Planitia shipyards at Mars. And then it turns out that synthetics, that's not even a term that they ever used in Star Trek. It's ripped off from Mass Effect. Thank you very much. Or from Alien, if you prefer. So synthetics, it's not a Star Trek term for it, but whatever. Have been banned in the Federation, and they're not trusted anymore. By the way, the Federation is portrayed as just a xenophobic, prejudiced, just bigoted organization. And Starfleet is this cynical military organization with corruption at the highest levels. I mean, it's like, do you people, have you watched any episodes of Star Trek? So the whole thrust of the entire season ultimately becomes that AI are being hunted to extermination by a group of the Romulans, and ultimately Soji, Data's daughter, retreats to a planet that is a safe haven for a bunch of other androids, and they all make the decision collectively that humanity is a threat to them and they need to wipe us all out. Of course. That's just so it's always got to go that way. And they're going to summon some kind of tentacle monster from another galaxy or something, and it's going to come into our galaxy and kill us all. And it's one of the dumbest special effects I've ever seen. This portal in space opens. It looks so stupid. It's like copy and paste, kind of the lamest idea of what a portal in space might look like. And these weird metallic Dr. Octopus tentacle hands start crawling out, and it's meant to freak us out. Like, oh, they're coming. What are coming? I don't even know what this thing is. Are a bunch of tentacles going to wipe out all life in the galaxy? It's not at all clear to me what that means. Like, and then the whole final battle is just, and then Picard has to give this speech saying like, "Don't do this, Soji. Don't kill us all. This is not you." I mean, this is Star Trek in the year 2021 and 2022. It's like this is what they've done. Star Trek Picard is a unimaginative, dark, grim, miserable, bleak, hopeless world. It is filled with greed, corruption, racism. It is just gratuitously violent. It murders beloved characters for the pure shock value of it. It acts as though it has a moral statement to make about these things, but it's obvious it's pure lip service. They just wanted to have a bloody, violent, gory story for fun, and then just shoehorn in some platitudes about why violence and revenge is not good, I guess. None of it lands. None of it has any weight to it. You know, Picard gives not one speech not one statement in this entire show that has any meaningful moral weight. Nothing he does, for the most part, is convincing. And what are we left with? Like, what we're left with is a bloody, gory action fest. And it's not even a particularly good one either. And, oh my God, I even forgot about this. So Picard hires this, he's clearly meant to be a kind of Han Solo type independent ship captain called Captain Rios. And Captain Rios, well, he's clearly the one they really want to be the star of the show. They clearly wish, I feel like the writers wish Picard just weren't there so they could just make Rios the star. He's maybe the least bad character on the show. I will say that much for him. Unfortunately, the show is so bad and all the characters are so kind of uninteresting and boring that he doesn't really have much to work with as a character. But of course, he has to have a tragic backstory. He has to. He left Starfleet. Why did he leave Starfleet? Well, it's revealed that he was on a mission to a planet inhabited by a couple of androids, and his captain was ordered. The two androids came aboard their starship, a Starfleet starship, as a diplomatic mission, and the androids were going to negotiate with the Federation. But Starfleet Command sent a secret directive to the captain to kill these two ambassadors. And you know, hang on. I need to get, I forget the exact sequence of events. I don't want to get this wrong. Honestly, I've avoided rewatching this show because it's so bad. It's so soul crushing. I just hate doing it. I'm doing all this off of memory. You know. Warning, spoilers for Star Trek Picard. I could not ever care. Oh, here we go. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Okay. So in 2390, while patrolling the Vite sector, the Ibn Majid, that's their ship, encountered a small ship of unknown origin and brought aboard its two passengers, Beautiful, Flower, and Jaina. The captain received a black flag directive from Starfleet Security. Are you shitting me? God, I didn't even remember that. A black flag. What the? That's not a thing in Star Trek. Oh my God, they're writing this like it's a CIA hit squad. This is just awful. The captain received a black flag directive from Starfleet Security to kill the two beings. Starfleet are assassins now. Otherwise, his ship would be destroyed with all hands. So, get this. That's right, I forgot that piece. I'm glad I looked this up. Rios' captain is ordered by Starfleet under a black flag directive to murder two ambassadors under a flag of truce on his own ship, and if he doesn't, Starfleet will destroy his ship. To all the writers of Star Trek Picard, Alex Kurtzman, Patrick Stewart, Akiva Goldsman, fuck you. Seriously. I just fuck this show. The captain received a black flag directive from Starfleet Security to kill the two beings, otherwise his ship would be destroyed with all hands. Rios confronted Vandermeer after the captain murdered the two beings with his phaser. Vandermeer shot himself in the mouth. Of course. Couldn't just be he shot himself. In the show, they have to make a point, right in the mouth, because he's telling the story and he's drunk. And it was so terrible. Rios covered everything up just as Vandermeer was ordered to do to protect the crew from being murdered by Starfleet. Oh, and of course, this gives him post-traumatic dysphoria. And oh, just shut up. Unbelievable. Okay, I'm sorry. Look, I don't even know. There's so much wrong in that one little explanation. It's like I can't even unpack it all. First of all, no one who understands Star Trek from the original series, Next Gen, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, or Enterprise would ever recognize anything even remotely like this in Starfleet. In the show Picard, they do explain that the Romulans have infiltrated Starfleet and corrupted it. Even that doesn't justify it, because that's the whole point, is that corrupt Romulan spies in Starfleet are what arranged this whole thing. But that's a bunch of bullshit, because I can tell you right now, any Starfleet officer is basically a good person, or they have earned that rank by being of high moral character. That doesn't mean they don't ever go astray or do bad things. I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying that they are at a higher standard within a humanity that's already at a higher standard than us in our current time. A humanity that has put behind it war, okay? So get this. This captain is ordered. This would be like, imagine Captain Kirk. He's on a mission of the Enterprise. A couple of ambassadors come. Oh, Mr. Spock, please welcome our ambassadors aboard. I'm Captain Kirk. I'm welcoming you to the Enterprise. And then an admiral sends him a black flag directive, says, Kirk, you're to murder those two ambassadors and hide it. What? Kirk would immediately know that that was either an alien infiltrator or some kind of trick or a malevolent alien force. There is no chance Kirk would ever even imagine that that was a legitimate Starfleet order. He'd immediately say, who are you and what have you done with this Starfleet admiral? You're not going to get away with this. And then if whatever being it was said, well, you're going to do this or I'm going to blow up your whole ship and all your crew are going to die. It would have put Kirk in a tough situation. He wouldn't have bent to it. He would have found a way out of it. Or honestly, him, Picard, Janeway, Sisko, Archer, there just isn't a one of them that would even consider carrying out that order. Never. Never. And the minute that they got out of that situation, they would have headed straight to Earth to expose this whole thing. Assuming, however, let's just say this was a captain of just weak enough moral character that he could... there's no captain in Starfleet, I don't care who it is, that would have believed that was a legit Starfleet order. But let's just go with the scenario where he's like, who are you and what have you done with the Admiral? Even if he were weak enough to say, I have no choice, and he killed them and then shot himself in the mouth, and then he said to Rios, cover it up to protect the crew. Not a chance. Not a chance. That would have shaken the entire foundations of Starfleet. Any Starfleet officer. There's no way Rios, if he were any kind of a good Starfleet officer, and this show portrays him as though he once was, there's just no way he would ever have put up with this. He would have known that Starfleet was compromised by a flat-out hostile force. There's just no chance. So this is my point. This is the shit that this show is filled with. It's violent and it's dark. I know I've gotten a little heated here, and as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this. I guess at the end of the day, life's too short. I don't want to lose a lot more energy on this. Honestly, I haven't given it a lot of thought in a while, but it's important to call this out. And that's why I'm doing this video, because I need to get this kind of artistic vandalism has to be called out. Now, why? Because I'm going back to the beginning. Every day, at the end of a hard day at school, at the receiving end of some really painful humiliation and sometimes bullying, that there were days when I had no hope. I just didn't feel life was ever going to get better. And I know that that's an experience a lot of young people go through. And to come home every day and at 4 p.m. have Star Trek The Next Generation come on, and show me good people finding a way to overcome tragic or difficult or morally challenging or just dark times and come through it as good, honorable people. It inspired me. It gave me hope. It reminded me that these things I was going through were not permanent. They were temporary, and that if just one human being stands up for what's right, that can make all the difference in the world. It restored my faith in humanity at 4 p.m. sharp every day. What these writers have done to that legacy is unforgivable. It is malpractice. It is just wrong. And they're never going to understand that because they don't care. They're narcissists. They've got their paycheck. They're making their 6-7 figures over there in Hollywood. They don't give a shit. But you know what? It still needs to be said, because it's not okay. It's not okay to just, honestly, if they ever just said, we hear you, to the fans or to some of the criticism, or they even just would go on a show and just talk to maybe some podcasters that had some harsh words for them and would say, you know what, you're right. We didn't do enough research to the original series. We kind of got in the weeds on some things. We thought it would be exciting and you'd like it, but we also understand why you feel it's the wrong tone for the show. And, we're only human at the end of the day. We tell the best story we can, and all we can say is, next season we're going to try to do better. Any version of that level of receptiveness and humility would buy so much forgiveness and from me, because I am a writer. I know how hard it is to tell a good story. I know how tempting bad tropes can be. I fall prey to them too, and it's a challenge. And I'd be appalled if I had written something. My story is by its nature a darker story, but it is also filled with a lot of hope. But I'm aware of the tone I'm going for, and but it's a tough line to walk. There were times where I knew I was going too far one way and I had to pull it back. And it's like, so I have great sympathy for writers trying to do their best. But when I hear the kinds of just soulless corporate promotion like that, the the Will Wheaton show where he just shills, it's all fake and phony. And tell me about this. I was so just emotionally invested in Picard in this episode, and Elnor. Oh my God, the moves with the samurai sword were so cool. And then they write snide little articles, just pissing on fans who don't like what they've done, and it's just like, that's the problem. It's like, just have if they had. I'm not expecting that or even asking for that. I'm just saying I have forgiveness for people who are doing their best and they miss the mark. That's not this. This is arrogant, narcissistic people who bought a property and they don't care what it meant to someone, to the fans who even made it worth having in the first place. It was people in the 60s watching Kirk have amazing adventures and meet new aliens and solve difficult moral problems and move the world forward and show them a better future. That was what created fans. And then Star Trek The Next Generation that continued that legacy. And for people like me that came home and needed one show, just one, to give me some hope in humanity, we are the ones who helped build that legacy because it spoke to us and we invested our time in it. And we didn't exactly win popularity points for liking Star Trek. We didn't win popularity points for wanting to dress up in a Starfleet uniform and pretend to be in Starfleet because it was such a wonderful, beautiful idea, you know? And now we're the ones that are at the receiving end of smug, rude, dismissive interviews from people like Alex Kurtzman who just don't give a shit at what they ruined. I'm sorry. I got no time for that. So it is important to call out a simple fact. Violence is not drama. And what you have created is not Star Trek. It's a nihilistic disgrace. And honestly, at the end of the day, I feel sorry for the writers of this show. I feel sorry for them. Because a whole generation of writers has grown up without the ability to envision a better world. And it's sad. So, and I know that it's not impossible to envision that world because check out the Orville. That show does it. That show does Star Trek the way it's meant to be done. So I highly recommend it. Listen, I'm sorry to bring you down if I have. I'll just leave you with one final thought, which is the hope that Star Trek brought me. That's not something that any bad TV show can actually really touch because it was more like it was showing me a truth that simply existed, which is that there's good in humanity that deserves redemption and that just might save our asses and result in a better world. Not a perfect one, but a better one. I believe that. I believe it because it's just what I see. And it's something that Star Trek in its heyday helped me see. And I'm grateful for that. And I always will be. So there you have it. That's my take on violence in the new Star Trek. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like and subscribe and hit that notification button. And check out some of my other videos, like my reviews on Orville, which are much more upbeat. And I hope to see you in the future. And as Q put it in Star Trek The Next Generation, I'll see you out there.